Good afternoon. It's a great privilege for me to present to you this course today dealing with mezuzot. Um, so as you see in the screen, kosher requirements of a mezuzah. We're going to talk today what is the definition of a kosher mezuzah. If we say mezuzah, do we really have to add the word kosher mezuzah? Well, what else can it be if it's a mezuzah? You ever hear someone say a kosher Torah? Well, how can it be a non-kosher? It's kosher. It's a Torah. It's a mezuzah. We're going to talk about that today. What are the ingredients of a mezuzah that if the ingredients are not there, then it may no longer be considered kosher. Before I begin, I was once told that almost, I think it was a large percentage, in the upper 70% of Jewish homes throughout the United States and Canada that have at least one mezuzah on the door. Very high percentage. What is sometimes people are just unaware that there has to be a kosher scroll in there, or there has to be anything in there, and they just put a case up. That's because they may not be aware of it, but they have something on the door to identify that this is a Jewish home. It's very interesting. It's a very high percentage, probably a higher number than those that sit at a Pesach Seder. But in any event, that's the reason we're here today, because everyone out there is interested in knowing what is a kosher mezuzah, especially all of you who are out there selling mezuzot. You want to make sure that, you feel good about selling something which is a real product. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
How do a second, I'm trying to figure out how do I know if there's anybody else still in the waiting room? Not sure how to do that.
Just
simultaneously. What? But I don't know how I see that. Okay, I'll figure it out. Just continue.
Okay, let's go to the next screen. It's very interesting that this week, as well as last week, we have in the Torah portion, Uchsaftam al mezuzot betecha avisharecha. This is the verse in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, in the Shema, that everyone is familiar with, that talks about that you shall inscribe them, meaning the mezuzot, upon the doorpost of your home and upon your gates. So no coincidence that this was all planned on the week where we actually read this in the Torah. So let's begin. Who is qualified to write a kosher mezuzah? So let's go through this quickly. In the secular world, it's illegal for anyone to prescribe pharmaceuticals without having the proper medical accreditation. We know that. Nobody can open a shop and say, I'm an attorney, I'm a doctor, without having the proper certification. In Jewish law, special scribal accreditation is required before anyone can be qualified to write a kosher mezuzah. And there are agencies in the United States and in Israel, of course, and in Europe that certify scribes. There are oral tests, there are written exams that they have to take until they become certified and they get a diploma. Actually, it's interesting, the diploma is only good for 3 years. You don't find that in any other profession. If you're a doctor, oh yes, you have to, continuous education, but nevertheless over here it's clear, 3 years, that's it. Because they want to review to see how well this scribe is writing or how well his knowledge is in mezuzot after 3 years, 6 years, and so on. So the scribal accreditation is known as Kabbalah. Let's not confuse this with the word Kabbalah. You go online looking for Kabbalah, mystical discussions of Torah. This is a different, the definition of this word Kabbalah means certification. In this context, the Hebrew word Kabbalah refers to a specialized course of formal education as well as hands-on training and the numerous complexities of the scribal laws. So when someone wants to become a certified scribe, not only does he have to perform and show the agency that he can write nicely, but there are many, many laws, textbooks upon textbooks that he has to review and study properly in order to be familiar with all the laws. The reason for the accreditation of mezuzahs must be written in accordance with a very intricate and comprehensive set of scribal laws. This requires specialized knowledge as well as training. Simply knowing how to read the Torah, I've had more than once someone tell me, I read the Torah in the temple every week. I should be able to read the mezuzah and tell you it's kosher. But that's a mistake. Because when you read the Torah, you're just reading it. You're not looking at every letter if it's written properly. And we're going to go into that a little bit later, what means a letter written properly. So just because you know how to read the Torah does not make you a certified scribe, and neither would you be qualified to check the mezuzot. And how to write with a beautiful calligraphy, somebody who writes beautiful, is completely insufficient to qualify a person to check or write a mezuzah. By the way, there's one certification how to write the mezuzah. The next step is a higher certification how to check a mezuzah. In other words, you may know how to write the letter Aleph Bet, but what if it was written slightly different? Is that okay? That's the next step. That's a higher level of certification. A sofer must be an honest individual. That's the first and the most important ingredient. Why that? Why so? And I'll explain this, very interesting. In addition to specialized knowledge and training, a sofer must be extremely honest and God-fearing, as many irreversible writing mistakes can be made while writing a mezuzah that would never be known to anyone. Let me explain. If there's one letter missing, this sofer is sitting in his room, and we'll soon see it takes him 2 to 4 hours. We're going to get to that. He's in his 3rd hour of writing. And who knows if he even has air conditioning in this room. And then he realizes that he forgot one small letter a few lines earlier. I forgot that letter. Can he squeeze it in there? And the answer is no. Every line, every letter has to be written in sequence order. So here is 3 hours of work. He has to take that mezuzah, put it aside, and start all over again. Now let me ask you something. The blinds are closed. The door is shut. Who knows? Who knows? Nobody's there. He looks at himself, my gosh, 3 hours sweating away. And now I lost 3 hours of work. Nobody's looking. Let me squeeze it in there. God, forgive me, It's not so terrible, God. I need to pay my bills. That's why we say that it's important that you're dealing with an honest individual, because we have to have full trust that he's going to follow all the laws, even though they are never going to be detectable. Thus, the scribe must be someone who can be utterly relied upon to follow the letter of the law and independently own up to his mistakes, even when there's zero chance of being discovered. Sometimes a real good scribe can detect, this letter is very small. It was squeezed in there. Why was that? So a real good, talented and a skilled scribe may be able to figure it out, but not always. Again, it's important that the scribe has to be somebody who we can trust. How difficult is it to write a mezuzah? And how long does it take to write it? Take a piece of art. Go into your living room, your dining room, and you see a piece of art. The exact same picture of Jerusalem, let's say, of the Kotel. You have one artist will charge you $500, and one artist will charge you $5,000. Why? If you look at it carefully, you see it's skilled. He has much more experience. It's beautiful. There's no comparison. So the same is with a mezuzah. It depends on the skill level of the scribe. An inexpensive kosher mezuzah can be written in as little as 2 hours. It can be written real fast, but you can tell that this is not the same piece of art. Sometimes you don't have to be a sofer. You don't have to be somebody who went to college for 10 years or a rabbi to see this is not the same as the other one. By the way, I have to say something. I mentioned before that every single letter has to be written in sequence order. That is not the case by a Torah in the shul. That's only by mezuzah and tefillin. So if there's a mistake found in your Torah in the shul, it could be inserted. Just wanted to say that because I'm sure that comes up in every shul, in every temple that comes up. We find errors in the Torah, human errors, and it can be corrected. So again, the mezuzah, inexpensive mezuzah can take up to 2 hours. A mezuzah that's written with more care, that $5,000 piece of art can take up to 4 hours, but it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Again, it's not $5,000 a mezuzah. I'm just comparing it to the $5,000 piece of art. But I want to tell you something else. I've been literally in thousands of homes over the years. Because one of the things that Chicago Mitzvah Campaign does, we don't only like to sell the mezuzah, we also like to go to the home and help them put it up. A question that many people ask me, and I'm sure a lot of you are thinking again, the same thing. Where does the mezuzah go? It goes into the case and it's rolled up. Who knows? If it's written nicely, it's not written nicely. I'm not putting it up in a big frame in my living room, right? I see people shaking their heads. That's right. So who would know the difference? If it's a beautiful scroll, let me get an inferior scroll, as long as it's kosher, as long as it's written properly. And why should I spend more money? Nobody sees it anyway. Well, you want to know the answer that I usually give to that question? Your heart is not visible. So do I really want to make sure that my heart is functioning properly? But it's not visible. Nobody sees it. Oh my gosh. The doctor will tell me, you better take medicine. Whether you can see it, whether you can feel it or not, you need medication. God tells us a mezuzah, as a matter of fact, every mitzvah should be done in a beautiful way. The Torah tells us, Zeh keli v'yamveyu. Every mitzvah should be done in a beautiful way. We want a nice car, we want a nice phone, we want a nice home. Why not a nice mezuzah? Whether you can see it or not is irrelevant. It's also, go back a minute. It's also important to take into account that occasionally a scribe can make an irreversible mistake. We did that already.
Right, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Next slide. What is the difference between a 10 centimeter and a 7 centimeter scroll, which translates usually 4-inch or 3.5 inch? In most gift shops, you probably have the smaller mezuzah scrolls, which are either 6 centimeter or 7 centimeter. And most of them come from Israel, so they go by centimeters. But it's very difficult, extremely difficult to find a kosher 6 centimeter. And again, we're going to talk about what means kosher in a minute. But 7 centimeter is possible, more available than the 6. But the 10 centimeter, obviously, the larger you write it, the nicer it is, and the more space the scribe has to really design each letter properly. So a 7 centimeter scroll is much harder to write and more difficult to source. If you want a real nice 7 centimeter mezuzah, it's hard. The scribes don't want to write so small. In addition, it should be expected to cost more, because since you have to write so small, and he has to be straining his eyes so much more, the scribe wants more money if it's written properly. Customers should be encouraged to buy 10-centimeter scrolls. You have to try to encourage your customers that it's okay to get a mezuzah which is 1 centimeter or 3 centimeters larger, because those that run the gift shops, we can find them and we can make them available much more than the smaller ones. Gift shops should carry cases made for 10-centimeter scrolls. We had many times people tell us we went to the gift shop, but they didn't have the case to fit the larger mezuzah scroll. So whenever you order mezuzah cases, I would suggest you ask, your supplier. Many times they have the exact same design in 2 or 3 different sizes. So good idea to stock them in both the 7 and the 10-centimeter. Next. Okay, now we come to the nitty-gritty. What makes a mezuzah kosher? Do you know what says in the mezuzah? The Shema Yisrael. We just mentioned before one verse. It's the same Shema Yisrael in my mezuzah, in your mezuzah, in every mezuzah. So what's the difference? Without getting into all the different laws, here are some of the basic principles that often present very obvious problems in mezuzot that were produced by non-qualified individuals. Don't go ahead. I want to tell you a number that I heard 20 years ago. More than that. I remember exactly when it was in 1996. We had some rabbis come from Israel to Chicago. At that time, they told us that there are 10,000 scribes in Israel, 10,000 scribes, and only a third of them are certified. Only a third of them. I don't know what the numbers are today. My guess, much larger. But we have the exact same problem today as well, that many people open shop, whether they wear a black hat or they don't wear a black hat, they pretend they are a rabbi or a scribe. Maybe they studied. I'm not saying they did not study the laws, but they were not certified. It's identical, similar to someone opening up shop. I'm a foot doctor, I'm a cardiologist, and he has no diplomas, he didn't go to school. He went online, and Dr. Google told him how to be a cardiologist. I don't think you and I would want to go there. So, but those are real numbers. Let's continue. So, number 1, it has to be written by hand and by a Jewish scribe. There are stories. I once got a picture from somebody who went in the old city of Jerusalem, and there was an Arab there writing a Megillah, the scroll of Esther. And he made a picture and he brought it back to me. And the Arab didn't know that you have to write Hebrew from right to left. So he was copying from left to right. He had a kosher Megillah, and he was just copying. And could be he writes beautifully, but we should have a Jewish scribe writing a mezuzah, a Torah, whatever it may be. One more thing. Many times we find, I have bags that I collected over the years. Mezuzot that were printed on paper, and sometimes we'll see in the next step that it has to be written, not on a paper, handwritten on a piece of parchment. So you find in the market like a color, like a brownish kind of paper that appears to look like parchment, but it's not. And we also find printed on parchment. So those that are trying, unfortunately, to deceive the public, find every possible way to do it. Either they print on paper, or they print on paper that looks like parchment, or they print on parchment, or they write it incorrectly. So everything has to be written on parchment. Move on to the next. Okay. So here, we're going to give you a number of ingredients, what it takes to have a kosher mezuzah. First of all, every letter must be there. So if you look closely at this slide, there's a mem
In the red circle.
missing. The right side where you have the red circle, compare that to the left mezuzah where there's a dalet. So that word is a 6-letter word, and on the right side, it's a 5-letter word. The sofer omitted 1 letter. And it makes no difference how large that letter is. It can be a small, tiny yud, the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, it's no good. So that's, by the way, also goes back about 25, 30 years ago. They came up with a program, a scanning program that scans the mezuzot, and you can see if every letter is there. But this is something I must mention to you. If you purchase mezuzot and it says on it that it was scanned by computer, that still does not mean that it's 100% kosher. Why? Because the only thing the mezuzah, the scanning program does, it tells you if every letter is there. But if you go to the next screen, if a letter is touching, you see those 2 letters, the shin and the resh, they touch. Every letter must be written without touching each other. That the computer will not pick up. Or if the letter was written sloppy, as we'll soon see, that the computer won't pick up because the letter is there. It's a sloppy aleph. Okay? Now, what can be done if we have a mezuzah that has some mistakes? As I mentioned before, there's a letter missing, nothing you can do about it. But many, many mistakes can be corrected by a trained scribe. If 2 letters are touching, sometimes they can be corrected, sometimes they cannot. And I'll tell you quickly, again, this is not, at the end of this class, you're not all going to become certified scribes, but I'm just going to give you some examples. Let's say you have 2 letters that touch, and by the mere fact that they touch, it forms a new letter. Then it cannot be fixed. In this case, the shin and the resh touch, but it doesn't form a new letter, then it can be corrected. But again, this has to be done. Not anyone can make that decision. It needs somebody who studied and is trained and is certified. So here, I know you have all the cards in front of you, but this is a very good example, the difference between scribal art and regular Hebrew letters. Scribal art, if you look carefully, is different. Look, for example, at the chet. The chet is so different than the chet in a regular letter. Look, for example, besides the crowns. You see those crowns on top of the gimel, the zayin, the tet. Some letters have crowns, 3 little strokes on top of the letter. You don't find that in a siddur. You don't find that in the alphabet that you show children when you teach them alphabet. So the mezuzah must be written in scribal art. By the way, there's a third way how to write, and that is just regular script, Hebrew script. Sure, a lot of you know how to write Hebrew script. Can you write a mezuzah with Hebrew script? The answer is no. So, and everyone, whenever I ask that question, everybody says, absolutely not. We don't see a Torah in our synagogue that has regular script letters. Okay, so you realize that the letter has to have a specific design. This is the design, the scribal art. Oy vey, 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 vey. This is a mezuzah, would you believe it?
I actually got this mezuzah. I think one of the gift shops emailed me some of the mezuzahs that they had, and this is actually one of them.
I don't know if you can figure out what letter is what. Now, do you have the Shema Yisrael there? Yes.
So
The Shema Yisrael is there, but the letters are not written properly. These are scribbled, as we'll soon see, probably children and teenagers who have nothing what to do in the summer, and they sit there and they write. So, by the way, I'll tell you another interesting story. This goes back many, many years ago. when I buy mezuzahs to sell, I need to know who is the scribe. And I heard that there's a scribe. I have to tell you the story because I'll never forget it. And everybody likes stories, right? The scribe lives in Kfar Saba in Israel. Wonderful. So I have a friend in Kfar Saba, and I call him up, do you know whatever his name was? And he says, of course. He lives down the block. How lucky I am. What can you tell me about him? He never goes to synagogue on Saturday. Oh, that's interesting. Why not? What? He says he's a hardworking person, but on Saturday he never goes to synagogue. I said, why not? He says, you want to know really why not? He's busy writing mezuzot. So he chooses Saturday from all the days because he's busy. He works in an office, whatever he does all week long. But he writes mezuzot on Shabbat. We never see him in a temple on Shabbat. Okay, that's why, and he could write beautiful. And you'll look at it, you'll never know when he wrote it. That's why it's so important to know who is the one that wrote it. These mezuzot that you're looking at right now, it cannot be that it was written by somebody who is honest, and we call him God-fearing. Because if he has any fear for God, why would he want to write a mezuzah and sell it and deceive hundreds and thousands of people? It's the pure deception. All right, next. All right, here are minor things that you find in a mezuzah. It's not major. The crowns are missing. So you see the tzaddik, crown missing, right underneath there. The tzaddik has a crown. But this can easily be fixed. And by the way, it's important to check mezuzot on a regular basis. Even if they were checked when you purchased them, let me go back. I'm going to rewind. After a sofer writes a mezuzah, then the best way is, that's the way I do things, and I hope many others do the same, is I first give it to a scribe that I know to review the mezuzah. Besides the computer checking, let him see if every letter is written properly. And many times they will find some crowns missing here and there. Human error, it's okay. Or a few letters touching, and he fixes it. Then he gives it to me and he says, okay, it's ready to be sold on the market. So this is just an example of little mistakes that human error doesn't mean the sofer was a bad guy, doesn't mean he intentionally did something like the previous one, but it could be fixed. Another common mistake, look at the word in the green. Can you tell where the word ends and where the next word begins? No. So again, there are words on a mezuzah. You may have the entire Shema there, but it has to be legible. I know, and many of you know the Shema, so you can figure it out. It doesn't count if you can figure it out. It wasn't written properly. You need to have space. If you want to write a letter to someone, you'll make sure to do a spell check. You'll make sure that you don't have words like that. Otherwise, if it's a resume, you're not going to get a job. Okay? It's important. It has to be written properly. But this is a properly written mezuzah. Obviously, it's larger than most of your temples would sell. But they make the exact same thing in small. I actually have a 7-centimeter mezuzah that's written like this. We just wanted to show you in large. Look how every letter is separated. Look how